So, Monster Hunter Wilds has been out for a while. I'm sure a fair amount of you have been enjoying the game with the release of the Arc-tempered or 9-star monsters, and of course, how can we forget Omega? This is all fine and dandy if you can run Wilds, as well as look past all the previous graphical dilemmas and the very questionable PC optimization. It's all rather jarring to say the least, though I'm admittedly still enjoying the game, and I'm looking forward to the release of GOG Mazios in Title Update 4. Oh my GOG. Though, rewinding back to February 2024, the beta for Wilds hadn't even been released yet. We'd only just gotten a teaser for the game in December, and during this wait, I'd been biding my time by doing Fatalis runs, messing around in Rise, and maybe doing some other Monster Hunter shenanigans. Though my eventual perpetual boredom led me to search for new horizons, which eventually led me to a game called Granblue Fantasy Relink. Now this game obviously looks more anime than Monster Hunter and also plays more like a hack and slash, but the similarities lie in the 4-player parties shown in this teaser, with the initial main draw for me being that you can of course fight big dragons. It's a very compelling argument of course, which I'm sure many of you would agree on, one which made me spend a fair amount of hours on the game. There's quite a few things I want to talk about when it comes to Relink, but there's a very obvious first topic to discuss, which is gameplay. The core gameplay loop outside the story lies in taking quests from the hub cities in parties up to 4. You can play quests online or completely offline with AI characters in your party. The AI characters are for the most part excellent. You don't need to worry as they are more than capable at helping you clear 99% of the content in the game without worries. And like Monster Hunter, the quests you take aren't going to be exclusively boss battles. For example, there's Conquest, which involves going through a map fighting enemies to get to the endpoint. Defend quests involve, well, defending a point. In Horde, you fight a couple of enemy waves. There's a similar quest type in Survival, where you fight endless enemies with a time limit gating you. Now these quest types are rather abundant in the easier difficulties, but this isn't the case in the hardest difficulties, which practically only have boss fights. Now, unlike Monster Hunter, which has weapons as your identity, you instead have characters. All 23 of which can be unlocked freely, either by playing the story or through more difficult means. While there is undeniably some overlap, overall the characters have their own distinctive playstyles. Mastering a character and their gameplay is absolutely rewarding. They are all visually amazing as you can see, and much like Monster Hunter, there's a playstyle, or in this case, a character for everyone. Relink provides different ways to strengthen these characters, the simplest of course being leveling them up. Then there's completing the character mastery trees, which you can use to unlock new skills or just give the characters stats. There's also weapons which you can level up and equip to your characters, as well as right stones that can be used on said weapons. Right stones are basically weapon sigils, and for obvious context, sigils are Relink's version of decorations or skills from Monster Hunter. You just equip these to your character's loadout. Some sigils are unique, while others are just stats, and to go on even further, doing character side stories will additionally strengthen your character. There's more than plenty of ways to get stronger in this game, which is the core gameplay loop you'll find in the endgame. Now, speaking of gameplay, we obviously need to talk about the combat, and I'd personally say there's no game that does it like Relink. This game dips into the over-the-top anime stuff while still being extremely fluid to play. The combat has a fair amount of depth to it, and the first thing to talk about is that all characters have a personal unique mechanic while having up to 4 skills. In this character example, Sandalphon has a gauge which primarily fills up from using skills and doing combo finishes. Once the gauge is full, he can enter his Archangel form, which gives him a new set of skills and new means of damage. As another example, here we have Namiya. She's a character who has 2 different stances that she can switch between, some of her offensive skills varying based on the stance. Performing combo finishes in the stances and using utility skills grants butterflies. These butterflies can be used to further enhance the damage of offensive skills. And as mundane as I might be explaining it, these characters are actually pretty cool. To move on, there's also a core mechanic called link attacks in this game. Bosses have a mini stagger bar which will trigger this. Link attacking grants character specific benefits like giving Archangel gauge or Namiya's butterflies, but also builds a gauge of itself. The entire party link attacking when the gauge is full supercharges your character mechanics and drastically lowers your skill cooldowns. This is your massive damage window. In World of Wilds terms, imagine having infinite spirit gauge on longsword or instant true charge slashes on greatsword while the monster is slowed. To speak of the bosses themselves, they also have special moves or even straight up raid mechanics in fights. You have boss moves that range from this to this. This is by no means an easy game. The last thing I want to note is that every character has an SBA, or an ultimate, which you can chain together as a group for a big finisher. Now, there's a lot more to Relink's combat and some min-max stuff I haven't explained, but I'll leave that for you to discover as these explanations would drag on. What I will say though is that this game excels in hack and slash genre. If you enjoy flashy combat with a serving of difficulty and you don't mind the anime art style, then this game is probably for you. But if you're not into that difficulty, that's fine, as Relink is still a JRPG at its core, which means we can talk about the story. This game's story is pretty straightforward. You are the protagonist, you work with your allies, or in this case a crew, and of course, you have your interesting villains to say. But other than that, the story primarily involves you visiting locale after locale, solving each crisis there, while also giving you the chance to meet some unique individuals. For some context, Relink's actually a spin-off from a game called, you guessed it, Granblue Fantasy, which is a mobile browser gacha game. The game is pretty old admittedly, but this is where Relink adopts a lot of its characters and world building from. This includes the existence of Sky Islands, the races, and primal beasts. This may all seem confusing at first, but Relink does a pretty good job at easing you in. From my understanding, the game only dips you just below the surface level for lore, but if you do end up confused about terms or just want to read up, the game includes a glossary that you can tap into during the story or outside of it. This is an excellent addition for newcomers, and I honestly think a lot of games should have this. Cough cough. Moving on to the story length, it's about 20 to 25 hours long. The early to mid chapters are pretty solid, but it kinda drags out near the end. And one thing that I think is a major oversight from the devs is that you cannot play the story co-op, which I believe would have been a big draw for this game. On the other hand, the locales for the story and the game itself are fantastic. Playing through, I often just stopped to look at the environment and said, wow. The bosses you'll find in the story and in the game are of course phenomenal as well, and combined with the game's soundtrack are even better. Even the soundtracks in the hub town or city are pretty damn good. Overall, I enjoyed the story, attributed by the fact that it wasn't overly complicated for the most part, and because of the combat, of course. Also, remember the character side stories I mentioned earlier? They're called Fate episodes. They give 2 sigil slots, making them mandatory for the endgame if you plan to use the character. But they also provide a bit of background and give a short story for them. I found some of these pretty amusing, but if you don't care, you can always skip through the majority of the scenes. Now, before I start ranting about the frankly really bad stuff, aka the grind and the endgame loop, I'm also going to quickly touch on some other issues with specifically the gameplay. As stated before, the gameplay is visually impressive, but that also comes at the cost of being visually cluttered in some quests. For one, there's no way of turning off the visuals for ally abilities, which makes dodging or blocking enemy hits tough sometimes with overlapping enemy attack indicators. The camera or targeting system is also pretty terrible. In Relink, you can target different parts of an enemy to break, which the camera will often have to go through to just switch to a different enemy or part. It's even worse when you're short ranged, as you may end up targeting a part out of range, which means you can't deal damage. Combine the camera, visual clutter with multiple enemies in a small arena and you have a recipe for disaster. This game was not made for multiple boss enemies in one arena, and it shows. Another thing is that Relink has a pretty bad gameplay system called damage cap. It's quite literally in the name. If you don't have some form of damage cap equipped, your damage gets capped, as shown by this demonstration here. So why is this bad? Well, it means that every build you make needs to have damage cap. This takes up sigil slots and leaves less room for variety in builds. This only affects players who play past the story though. To further nag, the game also has some multiplayer issues. You can queue up to help other players in quick quests, which are akin to the SOS flares in Monster Hunter World. The issue here lies is that sometimes you'll rarely find people, and it's very dependent on your location, time, and the current player count. These quick quests reward you with something called gold Dahlia badges, which can be traded in for some rare useful materials. Unfortunately, quick quests are the only way to obtain these, so these can be pretty hard to come by when the player base drops, making these redundant. Outside of quick quests, you can play with other people through lobbies, though the success of finding them is much like quick quests. If you're unable to find lobbies the normal way and are really eager to play with people, I would suggest using the Relink fan Discord to find parties. There are two final works that I have concerning Relink's gameplay. One being that bosses often have battle cutscenes that are unskippable. They are cool the first time you watch them, but it makes consistently farming them later on quite tedious. The other irk that I have is that when you quit quests, you can't retry them straight away. In Monster Hunter World or Wilds, this is mainly because of consumables, but in Relink you only get potions that always refill at the start of quests, so there's no real good reason here. And with that out of the way, we can now talk about the real meat of this video, which is the grind. Relink's grind is the main reason I made this video, and unfortunately it's not because the grind is good. There's quite a few reasons as to why the grind is terrible, and the first offender of this is Terminus weapons. Terminus weapons are the de facto best weapons in the game by a mile for the 20 of the 23 characters that have them. The first issue lies with getting them. You can only get them from one quest called the Tale of Bahamut's Rage, which has a chance of dropping the weapons. Now this quest is really cool the first few times you do it, both visually and mechanically like a lot of the other fights. But it's fairly scripted, which makes it stale after a while, as well as dealing with the drop rates. The supposed data mine drop rate is about 20%, combined with the fact that the character weapon you get is random. So if you're really unlucky, you'll be farming this quest for hours upon hours on end to get your character's weapon. The only true way of improving your chances would be to not unlock new characters so you don't get their weapons instead, which is beyond me. It took me about 80 runs of this quest to get all the weapons, and that's on the better side of luck while doing this online, which makes it faster. If you've got a good online team, then this quest will take you about less than 5 minutes. But if you're doing this offline, you'll be looking at about 10 to 20 minutes. If you've ever played Iceborne, then farming Terminus weapons would be comparable to farming the Safi weapons from the Safi Jiva raid. The exception being that Terminus weapons are basically mandatory for the extremely hard content at the endgame for Relink. The main reason I'm comparing these are one, because the chance of getting each weapon is RNG, but also because both types of weapons can be upgraded multiple times. Safi weapons just require materials from the Safi raid to upgrade, but Terminus weapons require materials from multiple enemies in order to go through each ascension cap to reach their max strength. And even if you reach the final cap, you may not even be able to max them. This is because you will need to complete all character nodes for the character, found in the skill tree and weapon tree beforehand. And this is with all the weapon tree nodes only unlocking when that character's weapons are max level. Which leads to my second gripe, which are Fortitude Crystals. Fortitude Crystals are the weapon EXP of this game. And I'm not going to lie, Chief. Farming these things makes you realize you didn't know how good you had it back then. If you eventually decided to farm these crystals in Relink, the fastest way would be doing 3 specific quests, each involving 2 of the same boss. You basically run from point A to point B dealing with mobs before the bosses. Each run would maybe net you 28 large crystals on average. To put this into perspective, 163 large crystals are needed to level a weapon from level 1 to level 150. Now, not every weapon starts at level 1, but you get the idea. If you really wanted to max out a character's Terminus weapon, you will be farming these quests an unbearable amount, considering the fact that you need to level up all the other weapons of the character as well. You could rectify this by making the large crystals drop from every single hard quest, or just upping the drop rates, but it's clear why the devs went through with this. While you have some variety with the 3 available quests, it doesn't change the amount of grind you have to end up doing since the drop rates are all the same. And this is on top of having to uncap the weapon level limit every 25 levels, leading to more grind. But the grind doesn't stop there because we have sigils. If you hated decoration farming in Monster Hunter World, well, this isn't any better. It's worse. Sigils come in various grades and can come in a combination of two. You can get sigils from doing quests, which also drop curios that can be appraised for additional sigils. These curios are also tiered. Some sigils can additionally be obtained through the shop, either by buying them with materials, fusing sigils together, or making them with knickknack vouchers. You can get these vouchers from doing quests, recycling sigils, materials, and writestones. And once you have made enough sigils with the vouchers, you can use Transmarble. Transmarble drops very good character-specific sigils. The problem is that you can get other sigils and other character sigils. And even if you were to get your character sigil, you might get it in a bad combination. Some of these character sigils are frankly nuts. They make characters go from balanced to broken, which is why this system sucks so much. The best sigils mainly come from Transmarble, curios, and some of the late game quests. The vouchers needed for Transmarble are capped, which leads to an endless draw of using and generating vouchers before save scumming the Transmarble to just get what you want. Additionally, the drop rates of a lot of the best sigils are abysmal, and are only from one quest. I truly wish grinding for this game's equivalent of Attack Boost Plus on nobody. There's just layers upon layers of grind and RNG you have to go through to just get the sigils you want. And that is not including the fact that you have to then level up the majority of these sigils. Which leads us to our next topic, drop rates. To level up sigils in this game, you need to farm materials for each level. The high grade sigils tend to require a certain material called Tayuita head units, which you can obtain through fighting the Tayuita. Beating the boss normally has about 50% drop rates on the head units. If you wanted the chance of getting another, you would have to go through the ordeal of weakening your party. That's right, you have to weaken your party. Basically, if you deal too much damage to the boss skips the mechanic you need to do to break the head units for the increased drop rate. And even if you do the mechanic, the drop rate isn't actually even 100%. This is one of the bad examples, but there are others. There's items like Exceptional Refinium and Silver Centrums which are needed in many things. These things include sigil or weapon upgrades and terminus weapon awakenings. But to no one's surprise, they have abysmal drop quantities and rates. Even with item exchanges available in the shop, the grind for these is still immense. The drop rates of some materials are so bad that some people actually prefer farming Azurite Splendors. These basically instantly max your sigils without needing other materials. You can get these from farming super rare slimes, but also from a really hard endgame fight. Which leads to my final negative topic about the grind, AFK farming. The aspects of farming materials in Relink are so bad that some players end up getting burnt out and end up resorting to AFK farming. In Relink, you can auto-repeat quests, build your character tanky, and let your AI party members do the work. And I don't blame other players for doing this. At one point in the game, I also caved in and ended up using AFK farming. But it sat really wrong with me, and I ended up asking myself, am I really playing the game? Sitting back and watching your AI do the work is really boring. And with a combat system like Relink's, I just feel jaded. The only true decent thing about farming endgame is MSP, which is the currency for the skill tree, and character awakenings, which just give you stats for your character. You actually get MSP from every quest, from overleveling your characters, and a load from using Ambrosia, which you can obtain rarely. I still don't know why they didn't use a similar system for the Fortitude crystals. Regardless, the fact remains that Relink's grind is terrible. It's pretty soul draining, but seeing as how the gacha version is known to be similar, I am not surprised. The bad material drop rates and abysmal grind just dampen the game a lot considering the brighter aspects of Relink. I'm still a fan of the combat art and soundtrack, but if AFK farming is an option in your hack and slash game, then you've done something severely wrong. Fortunately, if you play on PC, there are mods to assist you with the farming for the aforementioned topics. I highly suggest getting some of these to smooth out the late game farming if you do decide to play, so you don't get burnt out and enjoy your time. If you do decide to play on console though, well, tough luck. This game undeniably has its woes when it comes to the design of the grind, and this is where I would end the review if I wanted it to end on a bad note. But there's one more thing to consider. In every Monster Hunter game, you have a quest or monster to test your limits, and Relink is no different. In this game, the quest is called the Final Vision. and this is where you face off against a man named Lucillus. Lucillus is one of Granblue's core villains, and to keep it simple, he's a man who has the desire to destroy all of creation to spite God. Gameplay wise, he's sort of like Relink's equivalent of Electron or Fatalis. He has Electron's DPS checks and Fatalis' script-like fights. The reality though is that the Final Vision leans more into an MMO aspected fight rather than a hack and slash one. So what do I mean by an MMO aspected fight? Well, in this fight, we've got a lot of MMO classics, like Dodgeball, Twister, and Wiping. In all seriousness, outside of dodging the one-shot attacks and hitting the boss as hard as you can, you have to pass mechanics, beat the DPS checks, and save your ultimates for the right moments. This fight does not mess around. Failing some of the key phases will drop your max HP for the rest of the fight, making it a lot harder. But frankly, I wouldn't have it any other way. The difficulty of this fight is not just a struggle, it's the game showing you what kind of existence Lucillus is. But if that isn't enough to convince you, the cutscenes in the fight more than show the strength he wields.
Kneel and face your fate.
Guide me, direct me, by your light! Paradise lost! Paradise lost! Now, let's finish this!
Your wish is our command!
I really enjoyed fighting Lucillus. The challenge and the music make this fight amazing. Even if this is my first introduction to Lucillus, it definitely feels like they did him justice. One more thing to mention is that this fight actually has a harder version as well, but it's very difficult to clear even with geared AI and requires practically maxed builds which needs more grind. And to that, I consider the Final Vision to be Relink's realistic peak combat experience, one that I would recommend to any players up for a challenge. Granblue Fantasy Relink is not a Monster Hunter clone. While it uses similar systems such as sigils which are akin to decorations and has a primary focus on boss battles, it has a lot of differences. Firstly, the fact that you aren't really hunting the monster, as they don't exactly move areas, you don't need to utilize tools such as traps or flashpods, as well as track them down. Relink also puts a lot more focus on the story, having a more complex plot, as well as having characters with more depth, though this is partially due to some of the characters coming from the original Gacha game, with their backgrounds already fleshed out. The combat also plays differently, being much more faster paced and more flashy with the over-the-top skills and animations. This comes with the downside of the combat visual clarity being cluttered, however. There's also some questionable fight design choices. On top of this, the grind is additionally quite soul draining, which definitely sours the endgame loop to some extent. Relink is a game I would recommend to anyone who doesn't mind the anime art style, who prefers fast-paced combat as well as a story with more depth. It's difficult for me to recommend the game to anyone who wants to grind similar to Monster Hunter though, but if you're playing on PC, these problems can be supplemented with mods. The multiplayer issues, however, are hard to solve. It's fine if you're playing in a group with friends, but outside of that, the Discord is probably the only reliable option considering the small population of players. The game gets a resurgence of players when it goes on sale, but it's not exactly reliable. Overall, my experience with Relink has been mostly positive. The combat is by far the best part of this game, while the story and side stories were pretty enjoyable too. The art and music are also fantastic, though the grind stops me from picking up the game again. On a final note, games like Relink that are similar to Monster Hunter are good, Even though they might not be on par, competition ensures Capcom doesn't necessarily get complacent when dominating the market for this genre. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I hope you have a good one. See you later.